This presentation is about stress, trauma, and shame. If you have significant stress, you may wish to turn the volume down and read the slides instead. If you are a parent, remember, traumatized parents often blame themselves unnecessarily. It's too easy to think we're not good enough. Shame and guilt is part of trauma. Remember, you have done the best you can. Trauma is not only about accidents or violence. Attacks on your body come in many forms. You can be affected by trauma from your own past, and your body can also be affected by trauma from past generations. Trauma is passed on in our genes. And we can also be affected by the way we adapt to survive thousands of years ago. Trauma is passed down in our genes, but how we adapted to survive thousands of years ago was also passed down through generations. One important adaptation was learning how to live together in a group or a tribe. Members of a group needed to gather food and hunt. If you failed to contribute, you risked being cut out of the group. Without a tribe to protect you, you were the main feature on a menu for wolves, or a juicy tiger snack. Our survival depended on our flight, fight, freeze response. This response determined if you lived or died. These responses became automatic. Even today, in times of extreme stress, we cannot control our response. Surviving meant competing. Competing for leadership, competing to remain part of a tribe, competing with other tribes, and competing with animals and natural circumstances. Competition can lead to trauma. In a battle, there are casualties. Battles can result in loss of freedom, loss of self-esteem, loss of life, and loss of dignity. Our actions can lead to shame and guilt. We can teach our children that winning is important. Sometimes our children will believe winning is all that matters. Traumatized children can respond by lashing out and causing harm to other children through their words or actions. It's easy to fear the unfamiliar. We can feel uncomfortable in the face of different. We can teach our children that difference is bad. Without realizing it, children can start a cycle of trauma and pain that could have been prevented. Unrecognized trauma is especially dangerous to our bodies. Complex post-traumatic stress syndrome causes 70% of our chronic illnesses. And trauma is responsible for many of the problems we have today in society. PTSD affects individuals, family members, communities, and countries. Trauma is also responsible for poverty. Jeff Bridges says, 35 million people in the US are hungry or don't know where their next meal is coming from. And 13 million of them are children. If another country were doing this to our children, we'd be at war. Healing trauma can start at home. Trauma is carried through from one generation to the next. Traumatized parents pass their trauma on to their children through their genes and through their behaviors. Traumatized parents aren't usually aware of the damage they do to their children. Learning about trauma can lead to healing. We can measure adult trauma and childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is measured as ACE, Adverse Child Events Score. My grandmother committed suicide after my father was born. My grandfather lived in the time of World War II and a great drought in South Africa. My father's score ended up being 10 out of 10, and my score is 6 out of 10. But I was very lucky to have parents who gave me a great education, and I'd like to help others who have experienced trauma. Why is it so important? High ACE scores are linked to addiction, ADD, ADHD, alcoholism, anxiety, autoimmune disorders, cancer, chronic pain and fibromyalgia, dementia, depression, diabetes, heart and kidney disease, strokes, learning disabilities, and so on. Complex PTSD affects everyone differently. I suffer with anxiety, depression, ADHD, anger, and chronic sinus inflammation. Trauma leads to a sense of shame and guilt, where victims take responsibility for things that happen to them. But with all this adversity comes strength. You have to be strong to survive trauma. And with trauma comes a capacity for great love. How can you make a difference? What do you stand for? With social media, we have the capacity for great change. Will you be sitting on the sidelines? Or will you be one of those people making a difference? Change starts with you. Before you can help anyone else, you need to help yourself first. I have created this website so that I can share what I have learned about my own trauma and what I have learned about trauma through working with my patients. I received a one-time funding for this project, but have been given free rein to create the website. I hope to learn from people from all walks of life, so that this website will represent a large number of people.